All right, that basically brings us to the end of the full view from me and the team. Good night to you. Thank you for being with us, and do stay for sporting action and, of course, the watchdog. But we play out with this. The World Health Organization says a recent meeting with international pharmaceutical companies producing COVID-19 vaccines was very fruitful. The global health body, in its advocacy for vaccine equity, received a commitment from Big Pharma to prioritise and increase vaccine supply to developing nations. Special advisor to the WHO, Director General Dr. Bruce Aylward, discussed the issue with our international news editor, Sophie Mokoena.
This was a really important meeting that we had last week, Sophie. We brought together the heads of the international organizations, Dr. Tedros, as well as Dr. Ngozi from World Trade Organization, the head of the World Bank, the head of IMF, and meeting with us were the CEOs of the major COVID-19 vaccine producers, now the ones of both vaccines that have been approved by WHO as well as some that are in the pipeline. So across products made in Europe, in Asia, in the U.S., so all the major pharmaceutical companies were represented at a high level.
Doctor, tell us, what was the objective of this meeting? What do you hope to achieve? What was the intention?
Well, the key objective, Sophie, is to break the impasse that we have in terms of understanding where the global supply of vaccines is going and how we increase the supply to low-income countries, low-middle-income countries, and especially through the mechanisms that have been set up to try and ensure the supply to such countries, and especially to Africa. So we're really digging into the issues of why are you, the major COVID-19 vaccine producers, unable to supply COVAX and AVAT, the African Union's Vaccine Acquisition Trust, with the vaccines that they have contracted? And why are you not able to supply these fast enough? We wanted to have a closed-door Chatham House discussion to really have a frank, dig into those issues. Because as you know, Sophie, today we are getting to a situation where over 50% of the population is vaccinated in the high-income countries, upper-middle-income countries, but there on the continent we have got less than 5%, less than 2% in most of it, and it's mainly because we have not got the supply from these same manufacturers. So we had to have a frank conversation about that.
The developing South is struggling to get vaccines, while your developed North are talking about booster shots as we speak right now. Is this fair? Is this not vaccine apartheid?
No, it's not fair, Sophie. It's absolutely unfair, inappropriate, and it's in nobody's interest, which is the other reality of this, exactly like you say. And that was the reason Dr. Tedros, Dr. Ngozi, the heads of the bank, we pulled the manufacturers together to have that conversation. Now, you asked about the commitments that we got. So the manufacturers said, look, we want our vaccine used around the world. We want our vaccines used everywhere to stop this pandemic. So we frankly asked, of course, well, what's holding you back? Because your vaccines aren't going to COVAX, they're not going to AVAT and the AU, which means they're not getting to those places. And what we heard were there was a range of challenges. Some was in terms of their supply chain and what they could receive, some was in terms of export restrictions, some were in terms of other issues. And we said, look, we can help on those issues, but we need firm commitments from you. We need to understand how many doses are you going to ship by month to COVAX and AVAT and to the lower income and global South as well. It's not just low-income countries, even middle-income countries in the South to ensure. And that was the commitment we were looking for. So we got strong commitments that, yes, we want to help, but we said we need help and today, not tomorrow, not in a month, not in 2 months, not in 2022. So what we asked for, Sophie, was month by month you supply to the low-income countries. That's the homework they have. Now, they've agreed to set up with us a working group that will look, week by week to try and untangle these issues. But it has to move very, very fast. So the first meeting of that subgroup is going to be this week, meeting with the manufacturers to look at, okay, where are we on this? We need transparency of supply is what we need in this crisis, Sophie. So the commitment is there, but, we have lots of commitments. Everybody wants to help. What we need to see is progress on those commitments.
Were you able to zoom into the challenge of exports, lifting a ban on exports?
Well, the point you make is super important, Sophie, because the manufacturers may make the vaccines, but then they have contracts with high-income countries and producing countries which restrict their ability to be able to serve other contracts like COVAX and AVAT, as I mentioned. So a lot of our conversations was around understanding those restrictions so that then we could try and use other means and levers and discussions to try and open those up. But we can't do that, like you say, Sophie, unless we understand from the manufacturers which restrictions are you facing, where, not a general one. So we did get information in that regard. We have continued to reach out to all of the countries. And if you've seen now, just in the next day or so at the UN General Assembly, the U.S. government is calling for a summit to try and discuss issues like access and ensuring that everybody, every country will ensure vaccines can move freely to the places where they're needed. And we've seen some very encouraging news. Just over the last couple of days, you've seen the Minister of Health of India coming out saying they want to resume production. I read in the newspaper today, not production, but rather international shipments as early as October. So we are starting to see progress. What we need, Sophie, is momentum on that progress.
The issue of the regulatory framework. You have countries with their own set of rules and regulations in terms of regulatory framework. Were you able to discuss this, openly and in a frank manner?
Yes, absolutely. This is a huge issue for the manufacturers because one of the barriers that we're having toward equity now, Sophie, is that countries are worried if they use one vaccine or another, will it be recognized in other parts of the world? And that's the reason we have the WHO system, what we call the emergency use listing system, that helps ensure any product that is listed will meet the international standards for safety and efficacy. And what the manufacturers want and what we want is that every country recognizes any vaccine that has got the WHO emergency use listing so that these regulatory frameworks, and they're not really regulatory frameworks actually, Sophie, they're more political decisions about which vaccines will be recognized for travel, for trade. We have to open up and break that barrier as well if we are going to get travel and trade, the international economies moving again. So yes, that was another frank point that was discussed and to which manufacturers can't solve. That's a political issue to the political leaders of countries that are restricting the recognition of certain vaccines, even those approved by WHO.
Doctor, let's talk about, I know it is a thorny issue. This issue of travel you spoke about to ensure that the whole world, we are back in a situation where there's normalcy, where we can start to rebuild the economy. The issue of vaccine passports, and we saw different ways of introducing this. Some may not call it vaccine passport, but they are saying they are protecting their own citizens. For example, the United Kingdom recently on the red list, and then you have America doing better in terms of removing that and allowing people who have been vaccinated fully and without putting a restriction in terms of what kind of brand or product you are using in your country. What's your view? What's your view? Is this part of a fight for the market again?
We, as you know, at the World Health Organization, Sophie, we do not support the idea of vaccine passports at this time. And the reason for that is very, very clear, is that there is not equal access to vaccines. So if we don't have equal access to vaccines, how can you then hold people accountable? You're double penalizing people if they don't have access to the vaccine, then to require it for travel or movement or for other functions. So within countries, it's one thing what countries do. But when we look at the international movements of people, exactly like you highlight, we want to make sure that it's a level playing field, which means that there have got to be the same rules of the game for everyone. And you can't do that unless everyone has access to vaccines. So this issue of vaccine passports, for WHO, this comes back to access to vaccines. We have to solve the vaccine access problem first. That is our primary goal. If countries are going to require or recognize vaccines as one of the criteria for entry, what we are urging there, of course, is that, like we just talked about in the last question, they recognize any WHO-approved vaccines, because we use very stringent criteria for safety, efficacy of these products. So if you get a WHO-approved vaccine, we know it works.